We were told 2026-era robotics would solve the MH370 mystery. Instead, $100 million was spent proving a Boeing 777 can effectively vanish. No wreckage, no answers, nothing. But the real question isn't the ocean, it's whether the math we've trusted to find this plane was a lie from the very start. So why did the multi-million-dollar search for MH370 just end? Chapter 1. The $100 million Map of Nothing. On January 23, 2026, the most advanced fleet of underwater robots ever deployed in aviation history packed up and left the southern Indian Ocean. They had found nothing. Not a single confirmed piece of Malaysian Airlines Flight 370, the Boeing 777 that had vanished in 2014 with 239 people on board. Over the years, search teams have mapped an area roughly the size of Greece, 54,000 square miles of the most hostile ocean on Earth. Waves that dwarf ships, currents that can drag you miles off course, weather so violent it can shut down even autonomous systems. But Ocean Infinity's Hugin autonomous underwater vehicles weren't ordinary machines. They were diving nearly 20,000 feet down, deep enough to stack 13 Empire State Buildings on top of each other. At that depth, the pressure would crush a submarine. And yet, these robots scanned the seafloor with centimeter-level precision. In just 28 operational days, with weather wiping out the rest, they covered roughly half of a 5,800 square mile target zone. They were faster, more precise, more advanced than anything used before. They did everything right. Even Ocean Infinity's CEO said so himself. It was the most sophisticated technology the company had ever deployed, executed flawlessly. And they found nothing, not even a debris field, a fragment, or a shred of a single piece of a Boeing 777. Which means the problem wasn't the search or the technology, it was where they were told to look. Because that location came from a satellite never designed to track aircraft. It was doing math it was never meant to do, and it created a search zone the entire aviation world trusted for over a decade. Chapter 2. The Cruelty of Clarity. On March 8, 2026, Ocean Infinity CEO Oliver Plunkett released a statement. It just happened to coincide with the 12th anniversary of MH370's disappearance. It was, by the standards of corporate statements about catastrophic failure, remarkably restrained. He described the challenge as almost impossible to comprehend. He expressed pride in his team. He said Ocean Infinity had deployed the most advanced technology it had ever used, but the plane isn't where we looked. But it was a different phrase in that statement that deserves attention, the one about how finding nothing still matters because it brings clarity. It rules out the searched area, it narrows down the possibilities, and it gives future investigators a cleaner map to work with. This is technically correct. It is a scientifically valid and completely reasonable thing to say. It's also, if you're one of the 239 families who've been waiting 12 years for a coffin that never came, an absolute hammer blow of a statement. Clarity through exclusion is the kind of comfort that makes sense on a whiteboard, not in person. For over a decade, families have sat through press conferences that revealed nothing. They have watched search vessels depart with satellite uplinks and state-of-the-art equipment, only for them to return with maps of an empty seafloor. They've had pieces of the plane, a flaperon, a flap fairing, a horizontal stabilizer panel, wash up on beaches in Reunion and Mozambique. It's proof that MH370 is somewhere in this ocean and confirmation the wreckage exists. It's knowledge so incomplete it feels less like closure and more like a taunt. Voice 370, the advocacy group representing the passengers and crew's families, said that they would never give up. They urged the Malaysian government to extend Ocean Infinity's contract, which technically runs until June 2026. This would allow them another search window once the Southern Hemisphere winter releases its grip on the search area. They asked that the no-find, no-fee terms be made available to the other capable deep-sea exploration firms. They described the arrangement with the precision of people who have learned the hard way that emotional appeals move governments less than contractual logic. The government pays nothing unless the aircraft is found. Any request by Ocean Infinity to extend the search contract should therefore be granted without hesitation. The Malaysian Air Accident Investigation Bureau confirmed the search had yielded no findings. The Malaysian government said it would keep families informed. Ocean Infinity noted that its dedicated search vessel had since been redeployed to other missions, and time is ticking down on the contract. None of this is indifference. It is the administrative afterlife of a story already processed and closed by institutions. The paperwork is filed, the press releases are written, the search area has been ruled out, which is to say that clarity has been delivered. And somewhere in the Southern Ocean, a Boeing 777 still sits on the seafloor, still waiting for someone to ask better questions than the ones we've been asking for 12 years. Chapter 3. The 7-Arc Fallacy. To understand why the 2026 failure is more than just a very expensive disappointment, you have to understand the math that created the search area. And to understand that, you have to go back to what investigators were actually working with on the night of March 8, 2014. The answer is not much. Malaysian Airlines, in a cost-cutting decision that will live on forever in the annals of corporate penny-pinching, has subscribed to the cheapest available tier of their satellite communication service. It was provided by a British company called Inmarsat, whose satellites handle everything from cargo ship communications to in-flight connectivity on long-haul routes. Again, this was the budget package, the one that did not embed GPS location data in transmissions. When MH370 went dark and vanished into 6 hours of untracked flight, the only evidence it was still airborne came from a series of 7 automated electronic handshakes. They were sent between the aircraft's communication systems and a commercial satellite 22,000 miles above the Indian Ocean. A satellite that was never designed to track aircraft. A satellite that was just there. 7 pings, that's it. That is the entire evidentiary foundation for a search zone the size of a country. The other thing about those pings? They contained no positional information, no GPS, no altitude, no heading, no airspeed, nothing that would tell you where the plane was. What they contained was metadata, specifically 2 values. The first was a timing delay that told engineers how far the plane was from the satellite at each transmission. Plot all possible locations at that distance and you get a ring, an arc. The second value was a Doppler frequency shift caused by the plane's motion relative to the satellite, which told engineers something about which direction the plane was heading. The timing delay gave them the 7 arcs. The Doppler shift told them which direction the plane was heading, converging into a corridor of probability over the southern Indian Ocean. The 7th arc, the last transmission before silence, became the finish line. The working assumption was that somewhere along this southern stretch, the plane had just run out of fuel and the engines flamed out. The auxiliary power unit had kicked on just long enough to send one last automated ping. Then the aircraft descended unpiloted into the water. They called it the ghost flight theory. An unresponsive plane on autopilot flying itself in a straight line at constant speed and altitude until the fuel ran dry. The crew and the passengers incapacitated by some unknown event. There is just one problem with that. Well, several, actually. One is that the satellite receiving those pings had a known orbital wobble, a periodic north-south drift of approximately 3 degrees every 24 hours. It's the kind of thing that needs to be corrected for when doing precision calculations about aircraft positions. When the aircraft satellite terminal connected, the correction had not been updated. Its inclination parameter was set to 0, assuming the satellite was in a perfect orbit. Except that satellite was not in a perfect orbit. Multiple satellite experts raised this publicly in May 2014, roughly 2 months after the plane disappeared. The full implications for the accuracy of the derived search corridor were never officially resolved. In fact, they were largely moved past. Second is that the ghost flight assumption requires the plane to have flown in a straight line at a constant speed and altitude for approximately 6 hours. Every deviation from that, every turn, every altitude change, every speed adjustment shifts the final position along the arc, potentially by hundreds of kilometers. In other words, the model chose the simplest possible flight behavior and then built a multi-million-dollar search strategy on top of it. The third problem, and this is the one that doesn't get enough airtime, is that the 7th arc was never a location. It was a probability corridor. A ring roughly 1,200 miles long where the plane's last position was calculated based on these assumptions. The entire search effort, from the ATSB's years-long operation to Ocean Infinity's 2018 expedition and its renewed 2025-2026 search, was little more than an educated bet on which section of the ring was most likely. A bet built on fuel modeling, ocean drift analysis, and the ghost flight theory. It was all stacked on top of satellite data being pushed far beyond what it was ever designed for. The bet has now been called. The search zones have come up empty. The idea that this plane must be somewhere we haven't looked yet within the same corridor becomes harder to defend. What the 2026 failure demands is something more uncomfortable than a kind of corporate statement. It deserves a serious reassessment of whether the zone was right to begin with, whether the math that put it there was solid enough to carry this much weight for this long. It probably wasn't. And someone probably knew that in May 2014, when the satellite experts started asking questions that got quietly filed away while the ships were already heading south. Chapter 4: Shadows in the Abyss. There's another factor that almost never makes the headlines. It doesn't let search officials off the hook, but it is something that we should take into account. The ocean floor is not a parking lot. The search area sits over one of the most geologically turbulent stretches of deep seafloor on the planet. The Broken Ridge Formation is a massive underwater plateau created by ancient volcanic activity and tectonic rifting. It dominates the northern portion of the search zone. Its southern flank drops over 16,700 feet in a single escarpment. Underwater cliffs rise more than 3,300 feet above the surrounding seafloor. Slopes are near vertical in places, and fault blocks the size of mid-sized cities are scattered across the terrain. For context, the Grand Canyon is about 5,900 feet at its deepest. This terrain has comparable vertical relief in multiple locations, and that is across a zone that prior to this crash had never before been mapped at any useful resolution. The previous satellite-derived seafloor maps had a resolution of 4,900 feet per pixel. Trying to find a 200-foot aircraft with those maps would be nearly impossible. Side-scan sonar, the primary detection tool used by these underwater robots, works by blasting sound pulses outward to each side and then recording what bounces back. It is extremely effective over flat or gently rolling terrain, but anything hidden in the acoustic shadow of a cliff face is effectively invisible to it. An aircraft sitting at the base of a 2,600-foot underwater escarpment, approached from the wrong angle, would not show up on the sonar. It would appear as nothing, indistinguishable from the empty seafloor. So is it possible that the plane is in the searched zone and we simply couldn't see it? Yes, it is technically possible. Is that enough to explain 12 years and 3 major search operations all coming up empty? Probably not. Which leads us to the question the official investigation has spent a decade carefully avoiding asking out loud. Chapter 5: The WSPR Rebellion. While Ocean Infinity's robots were scanning the official search zone, a retired British aerospace engineer named Richard Godfrey was at a desk elsewhere, running calculations that the official investigation didn't want to hear about. Godfrey is no crank. That's important to establish up front because what he is proposing sounds, on first contact, like the kind of thing that gets you excluded from serious conversations. He designed avionics systems for the Boeing 747 and the Panavia Tornado. He was the founding member of the MH370 Independent Group, a volunteer collective of engineers, pilots, and scientists that has been picking apart this case since 2014. The Australian Transport Safety Bureau even acknowledges his work. This man has credentials. His theory, however, is where things get complicated. Godfrey has been looking at something called whisper data. WSPR stands for Weak Signal Propagation Reporter, and it is a global network of amateur radio stations that continuously ping each other to test atmospheric radio conditions. Every 2 minutes, these stations transmit low-power signals across the globe, and every result gets logged into a public database. Godfrey's argument is that a large aircraft flying through a path of one of these signals creates a detectable disturbance, like a shadow in the data, and by combing through the whisper logs from the night of March 8, 2014, he claims he can reconstruct MH370's actual flight path. His conclusion is the plane is around 33 degrees south latitude, roughly 1,200 miles west of Perth. That is right in the middle of where the official searches have already looked. The scientific community's response to this has been, to put it diplomatically, skeptical. Radio transmission experts have argued that any signal scattered by an aircraft would be orders of magnitude too weak to reliably detect. Victor Ianello, one of the most respected independent analysts of the entire MH370 community and a former collaborator of Godfrey's, has published detailed technical rebuttals. The ATSB acknowledged Godfrey as credible on MH370 broadly, while very carefully declining to say anything positive about Whisper specifically. So Whisper might be wrong, and it probably is by the current scientific consensus. But Godfrey's real contribution goes beyond the radio method. It is more the underlying demand that the Inmarsat math be treated as a hypothesis rather than as a verdict. That part is harder to argue with, especially now. Chapter 6. The Active Pilot Theory. Remember the ghost flight theory? It requires MH370 to fly without deviation until the fuel ran out and it dropped straight down into the precise path of ocean the math predicted. Yet the search zones all came up empty, which means either the ocean hit it or the plane didn't behave the way the ghost flight theory requires. And if it didn't, there are really only two explanations. Either something catastrophic happened on board that nobody's been able to fully account for, or someone was still flying it deliberately. The catastrophic failure camp has a case worth hearing. Some investigators believe a fire or sudden electrical failure could have simultaneously knocked out the transponder, the ACARS, and the radios in a single cascading event. The crew, suddenly blind to the outside world, turned back toward the nearest airport. They have around 30 to 60 seconds of useful consciousness before hypoxia takes hold. The Boeing 777's autopilot, designed with extraordinary redundancy, keeps the plane stable and airborne long after humans are no longer capable of flying it. A ghost flight, in other words, but one that started as a desperate emergency and not a sinister plan. It's a coherent theory. The problem is the 6 hours. Aviation history has no confirmed case of an in-flight fire serious enough to incapacitate an entire crew that didn't also destroy the aircraft within the hour, which brings the deliberate action theory back to the table. It's harder to dismiss than anyone would like. We know MH370 didn't drift off course. It executed a precise 180-degree turn and then threaded a path that avoided Indonesian radar coverage. The satellite communication system was switched back on mid-flight over the Malacca Strait in a maneuver with no satisfying accidental explanation. And on the home flight simulator of Captain Zahari Ahmad Shah, FBI analysts found 6 data points representing a simulated flight from Kuala Lumpur. They went out over the Malacca Strait, turned south, and then descended over a remote stretch of the Indian Ocean until fuel exhaustion. It was a flight path that looked a lot like MH370's reconstructed route. None of this is proof. The simulator data has been disputed and qualified for a decade. The Malaysian government's official report drew no conclusion about what happened on board. But the 2026 search failure quietly nods to an active pilot who doesn't have to land where the fuel math says, a controlled glide with a final heading change, a deliberate choice about where this ends. Any of those moves puts the wreckage outside of a search box built entirely around the assumption that nobody was making any moves at all. Chapter 7. The Geopolitics of Silence. Following the March 8, 2026 official statement by Ocean Infinity terminating the search, no government called an emergency press conference. There weren't any transport ministers in Beijing to console the families. The Malaysian government and its Air Accident Bureau said it would keep those families informed of any further developments. And just like that, a 12-year, $250 million mystery gets administratively processed into silence. The silence makes a certain political sense if you're willing to follow the money and the embarrassment. Malaysia spent years managing a story that exposed catastrophic gaps in its air traffic control, its military radar monitoring, and its initial response. The joint international ATSB-led search alone cost an estimated 200 million Australian dollars. China lost 153 of the 239 people on board and has a complex diplomatic relationship with Malaysia that predates and will long outlast this tragedy. Nobody at any of those tables has a strong incentive to fund another search that might once again come back empty. Voice 370 is still fighting. The families are still waiting. The contract expires in June, quietly, with no invoice to pay and no press conference to hold. Somewhere in the southern Indian Ocean, or possibly beyond it, a Boeing 777 is sitting at the bottom of something, waiting. We built the most sophisticated search apparatus in human history to find it, and came back with a map of where it isn't. If the sheer scale of human error, mechanical failure, and institutional negligence that surrounds MH370 has you questioning every boarding pass you've ever held, don't worry, we've got more where that came from in the most insane air disasters in the history of mankind. Your fear of flying will never be the same. Or watch this video instead.